Welcome to Homa Studio. This is Homa, and this is the first video in a playlist of using Gravit. I've taught computer graphics for 20-some years, and I've always used Illustrator and Photoshop, and this fall I was online, and I used Gravit for Illustrator, and I used Photopea for Photoshop. So I'm going to review Gravit a little bit for people who haven't used Gravit. It's an online application, and it's free. They also have a pro version, but so far I've only just used the free version. And just to get you started, I started a new account, so I'm going to go through that process. So make sure you go to create account and agree to the terms, and then this is what happened next. It said get started free. I'm not going to use Designer Pro. I'm going to get started for free, and it says my account was created, and they will send a verification email. So you should go and verify your email. So I'm going to go do that now. And I just verified my email that I received from Gravit. And the first thing that will come up here is installing Gravit Designer to your desktop. You don't have to do that right now. So I usually just put not now or X out of it right now. And I'll close this. Now I have two windows open because I had this one open initially. So I'll X out of that and I'll come back here. And when you start off, if you just want to do this like something you do in Illustrator, you could just go down here to paper size and just use US letter portrait. That's usually my default when I use Illustrator anyway. So I'm going to choose that. And you'll have an 8.5 by 11 page. The units it's using down here in the inspector is inches. Color mode is RGB. They do have CMYK, but if you try to use it, it'll come up with Gravit Designer Pro. So if you're not ready to use Pro yet, you'll find out some of the Pro features by doing that. So I'm just going to X out of that and just stay in RGB right now. Now keep in mind, if you were like, oh, I want it landscape, you can go over here to paper size and change it to landscape. You could even change your units. If it went in pixels or millimeters or something and you wanted to change it, you can go over here and change that. So I'm just going to put it back to US letter portrait. Now, if you're not seeing a ruler here, I'm seeing a ruler. That would just be like under Illustrator. You can go to View, and it's under Canvas, and that's where they have Show Rulers. So under View Canvas, if you're not seeing a ruler, go to View Canvas, Show Rulers. And the guides work the same way they work in Illustrator. You can drag them out here. You can drag them out this way. The nice thing is they don't lock by default the way they do in Illustrator, so you can just grab them and put them back if you're not using them right now. Now on the left side here, you're going to have pages and layers, which is nice. So you can make multiple pages very easily, like the old freehand program. And you can make layers here will be created automatically every time you draw something. So they'll make layers for paths, for shapes. And I'll just go over a couple things here just to get you started. This is a basic thing I do with students just to kind of work with anchor points a little bit. But just to show you the difference between some of these basic shapes. For example, if you made a square shape. Now, by the way, when I click on this thing, I'm going to see some of these things pop up with these little videos, these tutorial videos. And eventually, you know, this might be helpful or that might be annoying. If you want to turn this off, just go to Help and go to Learn and just uncheck Display Enhanced Tooltips. That'll turn that off if you don't want those things coming up because they can be a little annoying and they can cover up what you're trying to look at. So I'm going to go up here and I'm just going to draw a rectangle, and you wouldn't do it any different. And it's just gray by default, and I think all of your shapes have a gray fill by default, and they don't have any stroke. And by the way, they call them a border in Gravit. So if you put a stroke on here, you would add a border, and you can delete them and you can add them. Other than, you don't have to use that red slash like you use in Illustrator. You can just delete a fill if you don't want any fill on here. And if you need to see the outlines, they have outline view, and I'll put that back on. And one thing just to point out here, when I click on a page, if you had to make a transparent ping for whatever reason, you can go to page color, and if you turn this down, and actually whenever you see these things with numbers, when you first click in here, you have this little arrow thing, and if you just go down, you could just scroll down on there. It's kind of like the Adobe things where you can kind of go back and forth. In Photoshop, these go up and down, and you could put it down to 0. So if you had to make a transparent ping, that's the way to do that. So I'm just going to go back and put it up to 100%. I don't mind having a white page right now, and I just have a rectangle here. And one of the exercises I do in my computer graphics classes is converting a square to a clover. Now keep in mind, with these transform handles here on the pointer, as they call it, this is the pointer, they don't call it the selection tool. If you grab the corner, it'll stay in proportion. If you notice, you don't have to hold shift when you're doing that. Now you could still stretch it from the sides, from these middle handles, the middle transform handles, but it'll stay in proportion in the corners. Now, what I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to point out that this is a rectangle, and that's the way it's showing up in your layers palette. That means it's a special shape. The rectangle and circle are special shapes, and all these that you create, because they're not broken down into anchor points yet. Meaning, if you use the sub-select tool, which is basically your direct selection tool counterpart, if you use this, you're not going to see anchor points. You're going to see these little red things. And what's nice is you can make round cornered rectangles very easily, because it's not easy to do in Illustrator. It's very easy to do that here. But if you didn't have to make any round corner rectangles, but you did want to add anchor points and do different things, you'd have to convert this into a shape, because right now that's a special shape called a rectangle, and if you want to convert it into a path, you're going to use this tool a lot. It's the convert to path tool, and to my students I just call it the squiggle because it looks like a backwards S, but that's going to convert that to a path. So if you just click on that, now you'll see the anchor points as long as you have the sub select tool. And if you want to add anchor points, you can go right on the middle of the path and just click and go here and click, and I'll just add 4 anchor points because this is a little exercise I do. And then I'm going to drag these in and drag them into the center, and I have this little star shape here, and I'm going to convert these corner points on each 4 corners to make it like a clover. Now to do that, I just have to click on this anchor point, and over here in appearance they call these joints. These anchor points, they call them joints, and they have one called mirrored. It makes a curve point, but the handles will be the same length. So if I click on that and make it a mirrored point, if I grab these handles, they'll extend the same distance in either direction. And if I click on this and I hold shift, I can select these all at one time and make them mirrored points. They won't scale the same way. You still have to do that one at a time, but now I could drag these, and these are mirrored points here. So I'm making a little clover shape, and if I wanted to color it, now I can still stay in my sub select tool, but I'm going to go to my pointer and I'm going to go down here and add a fill. And I could just use a standard green, and you can move around in here in the little color picker area to make it a dark green or a different kind of green. They even have a little eyedropper here if you need, which I'll talk about later. But right now you could just make it green. If you wanted to use a gradient, you change it from color fill to radial gradient, and right now it's using black to green. And if you look at the slider, you can see it's going green from the center to black to the outside. Now if you want to change this around, and I'm going to do green on the outside and yellow in the middle, you can swap these. Keep in mind they're kind of small and thin, so if you accidentally click here and add a point here on the gradient, you can just pull down and drag it off just like you can with Illustrator. But they're kind of narrow, so they can be a little confusing. So I'm going to stretch them here, and I'm just going to put yellow in the center. So when I'm selected on this part, the black, and I'll make sure that's on the end, I could just go down here to my swatches and just make it yellow. And let's say I didn't like this light green up here, I wanted a darker green. You can go over here on the gradient and just kind of darken it up a little. So there's my clover, and then I'll come back here and just click on it with my pointer again. Now if you wanted to put a stroke on it, they call them borders, and they have a little plus sign here, and it's just a black stroke right now. And if you hover over the number, you could make it thicker. Now you can put a stroke behind it, in front of it, by going to the options here under border, the advanced border options, and I'm going to put it on the outside so the stroke kind of sits behind it. And you'll still have those issues with miter limit, so if you have real sharp points here, and I'm not going to mess with it yet because I'm actually going to fix that, or not fix it, but I'm going to change it. And I'm going to go to my sub select tool again, and I'm going to highlight all of these, and I can drag through these center points. So I'm highlighting these 4 anchor points in the middle, and I'm going to make them all mirrored. And now we got a little almost like SpongeBob looking kind of clover there, like those little flowers under C. And we're just doing that, and I'm just shortening the handles here, and they're all mirrored curve handles that we're using right now. And also, if I wanted to put another border on here, this is something you'd have to do in the appearance palette in Illustrator, almost like an effect, but in Gravit it's very easy to add another border. So I'm just going to add one here. Now it puts a new one above it, so I'm going to take the new one, which is 1 pixel, and drag it below. Keep in mind, try not to drag it out because it'll delete it. Drag it straight down, and now the 1 pixel one is below it. And what I'm going to do is go to my advanced options, make sure it's on the outside. Now you're not going to see it right now, and I'm going to make it thicker. I'll make it thicker than the other one, and I'll change the color just so you can see it. And I'll just put a pink color on the outside. So now it's putting a 19 pixel stroke behind it. So you could put multiple strokes. That's kind of nice to use when you're working with text and things like that. So you can put multiple borders here. If you want to delete any borders, it's very easy to just go here and select one and hit the trash can. So if I would hit delete right now, that would delete the black one, but I'll undo that. And this is my Clover. It's on page 1. If I wanted to change the name of the page, I can just call it Clover. And keep in mind, when I converted this to path, notice it went from rectangle and path, and it now has a little path icon there. And let me make a new page because I'll just go over a couple things. I'll add a new page up here, and right away I'll call it heart, and I'll make it from a circle. And what I'll do is I'll use an ellipse, as they call it, and I'll just make it as circular as I can. Grab it in the middle, and I'll move it to the top of my page here. And notice it's an ellipse and it's a special shape. Now if I want to mess with anchor points, I'm going to have to use this sub-select tool, except remember, because it's an ellipse, it doesn't give me anything to do. It just gives me this thing. So if you wanted to make a Pac-Man kind of shape, I don't do that very often, so I probably wouldn't have to do anything like that. So I'm just going to undo it. But if you actually wanted to edit the anchor points, remember, use the squiggle, use the convert to path, and now it says path. You can see it has a pen there, so it's a path. So now it has 4 anchor points. They're all curve anchor points. They are not mirrored by default. You can see if you grab one here, the handle extends a little bit more and the other handle doesn't move. So that means it's this type. It's the asymmetric as opposed to the mirrored. Now you can make it mirrored if you want. I believe you could go here and make it mirrored, and now they'll move together the same distance if you need to. But what I'm going to do is make a heart. So I'm going to drag this down and make this kind of squashed looking thing, and drag the bottom down. Now these are all curve points right now, and I'm going to take this top point, and they call it a joint, and I'm going to use disconnected. And disconnected disconnects those handles so they don't work like a curve anymore. So it doesn't kind of maintain that smooth transition between both of them. So I can move one handle up and the other will stay down. Or I can move both handles up and make like these TV antenna kind of things. And then down here, if I want to continue my heart shape, I can either suck the handles in by making it a straight point, or I can use the disconnected. And when it uses disconnected, it just puts them back there and it kind of sticks them out. But now I can drag this in and make more of a cartoon heart, because now I have 2 handles for each line segment. So for this line segment here, I have 2 handles, and that's making that little S curve. I always tell my students, if you kind of have one going out, one going in, you're going to have that little S curve. So I'll do that, and I'll move this up, and now we have a little heart shape out of a circle. And again, it's working with a path, and you could change this name too. Now I guess you can call it heart path, and it'll keep that path icon as long as it's a path. And just to review, I'll go to my pointer, I'll give it a fill of a gradient, so I'll just make it red, and if I wanted a radial gradient, I'll click on it, and it's doing red in the middle, black on the outside. If you want to flip these, I don't know if they have a flip button on here, let me see. Oh yeah, they have a flip button here, so you can, instead of dragging them onto either side, you could flip them, and then I could just make the middle white. So I'll go down here and click on white. Now this gradient thing, especially for the radial, is a little confusing, just as it is in Illustrator. But a couple things I'll point out in the beginning is, if you want to move this around, hover over this little blue line and keep the L shape, and then just move it around like that. Don't try to grab these things and move them around, and grab this thing, move it around, and do this kind of stuff. It'll just get confusing in the beginning unless you know what you're going to do. But I recommend for my students just to keep them in an L shape right now, and then hover until you get this quad arrow and move it around like that. Now if you're going to rotate it, now you wouldn't rotate a radial gradient, but if you do, you can move this down, and I always recommend just keeping it in an L shape. That's helpful when you need to adjust it a little bit, but for a radial it doesn't really matter. But again, the important thing is when it's blue like that, just hover over and move that. These things scale, so you can kind of scale them in a vertical direction and in a horizontal direction. But I'll go over more of gradients later, because gradients can be a little confusing. But just keep in mind, if you want to move it around like that. You can add more colors in here. So if you want to click here and add a yellow, you could certainly do that. It's now going from white to yellow, and this is where you might want to stretch it out or do something like that. If you had another color in there, or if you decided you didn't want it, you could just grab it, delete it, and go back to being white and red. And one thing, I'll just show you one last thing before I end this video. If for some reason you wanted to use this look on the heart, you can select this thing and go edit, copy. You don't have to copy style or anything like that, just use edit copy. And if you go back to the heart and you do edit, paste, they have paste style. Now in the free version you can't save styles, but you can paste style. So it's kind of like the paintbrush tool that you might see in Office or something like that. So I'll do paste style, and you can actually paste that style here now. And if you had an issue with the Looks like we have an issue here with the miter limits on here. That's something where you could go in here. I'll go in this one, and I'll go in advanced settings, and I'll increase the miter limit till it goes away. Now obviously I'm not really doing a lot with the lines right now, so I'd have to adjust that. And if I'd go here and I'd want to adjust that miter limit, I'd go in the advanced settings and I'd just increase that just by sliding up here, and eventually after a certain point it'll make a point here, and there it is. If you needed to do something like that, if you needed to delete a stroke, if you're like, I don't like that pink stroke on there, you can just select it down here, hit the trash can, and it's gone. And when you want to save this, I'm going to go File, Save to Cloud As, and I'll make a new folder here. I'll call it Home Studio, and I'll save it as Clover Heart. And you don't have to put any extension on it right now, unless you were going to use the desktop version, but right now not, so I'll just call it Clover Heart, and I'll hit Save. And now it's saved, and then make sure it says Synchronized. And what's nice, if you had to share this, I have students share these, you can go to Share, and you can just copy the link, and I have students post things with links like that when they do their work. So keep in mind you could do that just like Google Docs or something like that. So that's just a little intro here. I'm going to go over a number of things with some of these shapes here, and even some of the little idiosyncrasies that can kind of pop up with Gravit I'll go over. But this is just a little intro Gravit, and I really like Gravit, so I want to introduce it to you and have a whole playlist of videos in case you're using it for education or anything else.